Today we're going to talk about every single character in Genshin Impact, the usage rates that were collected, how my opinions of the characters and their performance differ from the usage rates here, and we're going to give some tips and tricks for the mashers out there who maybe still haven't quite 36 starred the Abyss, or if you just want to optimize your clears. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. First things first, I want to give a huge shout out to the Genshin scientist once again. I've been meaning to make videos analyzing the Abyss and usage rates for a long time, and I've just been putting it off, and he made a video and it's doing really well, so it finally motivated me to make this video. I haven't actually watched it yet because I don't want his opinions to taint mine, so after you watch me, go and watch his and see how we compare, and tell him how wrong he is, and tell him Jello sent you. So first things first, let us talk about the Abyss itself and the kind of teams that we would expect to do well before we look at the usage rate specifically, because I've played the Abyss a lot. I haven't played it with every single character. I would like to do that eventually. I've just finished building all the characters on my account, which is really exciting, but it takes a really long time to clear with everyone. But I have played the Abyss a lot, so and I've played a lot of the characters a lot, so I have a really good idea of what does well in general. But I'm really interested to see where I might be wrong, or where I can learn something, or where I can share some stuff with you. So the first half is the AoE half, and it's basically like 2 enemies at once throughout the whole thing. So it's like 2 enemies side by side, back to back to back. And the second half is a single target chamber with obviously the Weenut, Rune Serpent, and Aeonblight Drake. And these enemies are well known for being annoying because they have very short vulnerability phases. So whatever characters you want to choose, you want them to be able to do their damage fast and without too much setup. You don't want characters that have a really long sustained amount of damage on the second half. Those are the characters you'd want to put on the first half. You also pretty much want a bow character, although there are certain funny tricks that you can do to knock down the Aeonblight Drake otherwise, but generally a bow character is going to be your best bet. And I just thought of this now. I haven't actually used Beto this Abyss, but I imagine Beto is like super good on the first half because it's all 2 enemies, and that's where Beto does best. So that's something that jumps out. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of characters that could do well. This isn't a particularly hard Abyss if you're asking me. I think probably the place that people maybe are struggling is the Weenut, but I think the first half is easy and quick enough that you can often leave yourself with enough time if you have a really strong single target team. So let's take a look at the usage rates and see what we see. We have Furina and Nahida. This makes a lot of sense because Furina and Nahida are some of the strongest characters in the game. Like, they are just ridiculously strong. I put them at the very tippy top of my tier list, and they are 2 out of the 3 must pulls in my opinion. So that's, that's to be expected. I would expect these 2 to be at the top of the usage rates among pretty much any Abyss that doesn't have immunities on like both sides because they're just that strong. Now keep in mind how the usage rates are collected is it's percentage based of the character ownage rate. That probably didn't make any sense. This is 84% of people who have Furina use her to clear this Abyss. So, and that's to be expected. Furina is so flexible and so strong. So obviously character strength is going to be a factor when we're looking at these percentages, but it's also going to be skewed by how replaceable a character is. If a character is very replaceable, even though their power might be high, their percentage will be lower. So we have Novelette at 69%. This makes a lot of sense because the first half is all 2 enemies side by side. Novelette can easily line them up and hit both of them, so that makes a lot of sense. Zhongli, 68%. I want to look over at the team section and see what teams Zhongli was actually used in. So he's used in Novelette, that makes sense. Used in Hu Tao, that makes sense. And used in Tighnari, that makes sense too. I am surprised to see Zhongli this high. I think I've been influenced by a lot of people that say, Zhongli isn't that strong of a character. And especially these days with Furina, like he pretty much has no synergy with Furina because she needs a healer as the other defensive utility. So that leaves only one side for Zhongli. So it's kind of crazy that he's at such a high percentage. I'm kind of curious about something. So if I look at my Abyss clears, I also use Zhongli a lot. Not as much as I use Furina though, and I use Coswell for a lot too. The thing about Zhongli is that he is not always the optimal damage choice. He's pretty rarely the optimal damage choice for a team, but he makes for such a comfy, consistent clear while not being too big of a damage loss. So it's usually worth it. Like if you value consistency, just player friendliness, ease of use, it does make a lot of sense that Zhongli would be high up, and he is good in a lot of these single target teams like Hu Tao and Tainari, as well as very good in Novelette teams, especially if you have a C0 Novelette. So that makes sense. Yelan obviously makes sense. She's so good in single target, and for the second half, even though like you don't want to have a long setup time for the Rune Serpent, for the Weenut, if you know their attack patterns, you can start setting up your rotation before they come out of the ground. So using a double Hydro Hu Tao, for example, you can set up your whole rotation right before it comes out of the ground. Then Hu Tao can start attacking. So in that way, it can be easier to execute than one of the more complex, higher damage ceiling setups with Hu Tao, like a VV Vape setup, because then you have to do the whole setup when they've actually appeared, and you're not going to get nearly as much damage. So Yelan makes a lot of sense. Kazuo makes a lot of sense. Very good in the first half. Baiju is interesting being this high. I think it's in large part to Farina being so high. Because if you're running Farina, if you have a wide variety of characters available on your account, you're usually running either Baiju or Shanyun with your Farina team. So it does make sense that Baiju would be this high. And not only can he be on the Farina side, he can also be on the second side doing Hyperbloom stuff. I actually like Baiju as a Hyperbloom driver. He can free up your Nahida for the other side as well. You can use him with Nahida, I suppose. You can run him with Aggravate, which is really good on the first side. So yeah, there's a lot of teams that Baiju is really good on that are good in this Abyss. And there's not a lot of healers that work really well with Farina. Shanyun being another one. I'm interested to see where Jean ends up here. But it does make sense, of course, that characters like Jean, who everyone has, won't be as popular as a character, as a 5-star that you have to wish for. Like if you get Jean, you might not want Jean, but you'll get a Jean anyways. Or if you wished for Shanyun, you wanted Shanyun, so you're probably going to try and use her. So that's why a lot of limited 5-star characters have such a higher usage rate than standard banner 5-stars or others. Yae is really interesting to me because this is really high, and she hadn't even like rerun yet. Like her rerun started after this was posted. But it does make sense because if you didn't know, Yae turrets can actually hit underneath the ground. So you can actually hit the Ruined Serpent underground. I don't know if you can hit the Weenut underground, but regardless, it's very easy to set up her turrets during the Weenut and the Ruined Serpent's downtime. And you're basically just getting free damage when you do that, because normally you have to spend field time, rotation time, setting up Yae. But when the enemy goes underground, you basically get free time to do that. So you don't lose DPS because you can set them down. You lose less DPS than most characters because she's being productive during the time that they're hiding. Plus, you can do a funky setup where you use her turrets right below the Aeon Blight Drake as he's going up. I did want to show you how it can be done. You set up their turrets right here and it knocks it down. So let's watch them again. She does it right here and right there. And as it goes up, it knocks it down. So sick. Definitely give that a try. Thanks for Gabra for making this video. So Yae just extremely good on the second half. She's also good in the first half though. Aggravate is a great team on the first half. So yeah, whichever side that you need her for, she's a great character for this Abyss. She works with Kazuha, Baiju, Fischl, something like that, and that has great AoE with her burst, easily able to knock things down. So good character. Bennett, of course, always going to be high up. Lots of good teams work with Bennett. No surprise here. He's not as high as you might expect, like being an S+, basically because of what I said before. Everyone has a Bennett. You didn't have to go out of your way to wish for a Bennett, so that's why he's lower. Xingqiu, same story. In addition, he also has overlapping roles with Yelan and Yelan and Farina, and with Novelette to a degree, being a Hydro. So that's why he's used less than, like, if these characters didn't exist, he'd be much higher, or if you don't have these characters, he's going to be higher. But overall, still an incredible performance. Raiden, also a pretty high performance, considering how many people have Raiden. Like, 41% is really high, and again, I think it's because she's good on the top and bottom half, being able to do good AoE, and also having good front load, especially if you use her with Chevreus or double Hydro. She can be good on the second half, and any of her teams are really good on the first half, and even National can be good on the second half as well if you use Yelan to be able to knock down the Aeon Blight Drake. So Raiden makes a lot of sense. I'll hype him. Hyperbloom, super good. I love Hyperbloom against the second side. It's just so easy to get Hyperbloom. It does consistent damage that doesn't require reactions and setup. It's really good. Even though it's sustained damage and not front load, it does such high single target damage without very much setup that it ends up being really good. And Zhao makes a lot of sense for the first half, especially with Shanyun being released. People want to try out Shanyun with Zhao. We didn't even talk about Shanyun, but she is really good. and the first half being very, very good for Zhao's AoE. Kokomi makes sense for freeze. Hu Tao really good on the second half. We talked about her a bunch. Xiangling in national or in Navia teams on the first or second side, really. I'm surprised that Navia isn't higher. I'm not gonna lie, all the way down at 17%. That's really interesting to me because I've used Navia a ton this Abyss and I found her very good on both the first and the second side. So that's kind of interesting to me. Risley quite high, probably because of his single target damage. I need to play Risley more because he's a character that I consistently feel underwhelmed by, which is I don't think it's a fault of Risley. It is what it is. Let's see what people are using. Melt on the first half, Farina on the first half, Plunge Melt on the first half. Yeah, I'll just have to play more. These are pretty standard teams, and I can see them doing well. I just haven't enjoyed them that much. Tainari, as we said, makes a lot of sense. Really high bursty single target damage. Child really good on the first half. Shenhe freeze is actually really good this Abyss on the first side, so that makes sense. Farzan, most people just don't have C6, so you're gonna see, and she's only got an Animo team, so that is innately gonna restrict her usage, so this makes sense. Ayaka freeze really good on the first half, but I think it's funny that Shen has actually used more than Ayaka, because right, Kokomi is used on not just freeze, she's also used in Nilou. Shen has used not just on Ayaka, but also on Ganyu now. I've been enjoying Ganyu Mono Cryo on the first half a lot, because it's actually a really good AoE team, so I think it's kind of interesting and funny how Shenhe is a higher number than Ayaka, but you also have to remember this is usage rates, and this is why I don't love usage rates, because people who pulled for Shenhe there's like a lot less people that pulled for Shenhe. There's a lot more people that pulled for Ayaka, and if you pulled for Ayaka without Shenhe, you're not as dedicated of an Ayaka main that pulled Ayaka with Shenhe, so less dedicated mains are playing her. So it's kind of this weird thing that you look at these numbers, but there's so much that goes behind them. There's probably 10 times less people that have a Shenhe than have an Ayaka. So it's really skewed, if that makes sense. But yeah, Navia and Linny really surprised me for being so low. Nilou surprises me. I guess it's not as good with a 2-target Abyss. She's not as good. Yuemi is a little bit surprising, but I think this is mostly just a result of there being so many DPSs. Like, you think of how many DPSs you have, you're gonna gravitate towards certain ones. It's not gonna be, and if one is better, like if you have both Kazuha and Sucrose, let's say, or maybe that's not the greatest example, but let's say you have, yeah, Hu Tao and Yuemi is a great example, right? You have both Hu Tao and Yuemi on your account, and Hu Tao is just a little bit better in the Abyss overall. Pretty much 90% of people are gonna go for Hu Tao over Yuemiya, and so even if Yuemiya is just a bit worse, her performance is gonna be way worse because of that reason. Fischl suffering from 4-star, everyone has her status. She's really good this Abyss, both first and second half, especially being a bow character, but obviously being a 4-star for the reasons that I talked about is going to be lower. Ganyu, pretty low. I think it's funny that B tier is 18 to 5%. Jean being at 9.7. I'm kind of curious as to how much higher or lower this is than the previous one. Yeah, 12.1% in the last one and fallen to 9.7, so not as big of a drop as I would have expected from Shanyun being released, but still a noticeable drop, and that's probably why people have switched over to Shanyun. Sino at 5.4. I don't like Sino this Abyss very much. He's not my favorite because he takes a long time to set up and he has a long rotation time. He's still pretty good on the first side, but because he doesn't have like that amazing AoE and the enemies are a bit spread out, and if you don't have a grouper, it can be kind of annoying to use Sino. So yeah, I'm not a big fan. I'm really not a fan of Venti this Abyss. The enemies are just not that groupable. Chevreuse, this makes sense. Most people don't have C6, but I've found her incredible this Abyss. I personally, both first and second half, she's so good because she doesn't need any setup time on the second side. The only thing I will say is that her ability to hit the Aeon Blight Drake doesn't seem to be there. I tried a bunch, couldn't get it to be knocked down, which is annoying, but it is what it is. Seems like specifically a bow character is what you need, but maybe I just did it wrong. Mona is really surprisingly high. What do people use with Mona? I'm really interested. Mona Vaporize, Mona Quick Bloom, Shanyun Mona Vape. I mean, these are Mona carry teams, which I'm imagining people aren't using. Let me know, people. I don't even have Mona, so I can't test her. Genshin's never given to me, so let me know what you're using Mona with. Albedo, interesting. I think people are using Albedo with both Navia and Ito, so maybe that's why he's a little bit higher. But he has AoE, so I can see him working on the first half. That makes some sense to me. I didn't talk about Ido. Ido should be good in both the first and second half. His infusion window is actually pretty decent for Weenut and the other thing. And he's good in Hyper Bloom. In the first half, he has good AoE, so I can see that. Nilou makes sense. Wanderer, yeah. Charlotte, I think makes sense being a 4-star, being one of the free-to-play healers for Farina. Kaching, I like this Abyss for the first half especially. Aggravate being a good choice. I'm really surprised that Beto is so low. I think it's because people just have so many options. Like, Beto being this low is just wild to me. Eula's pretty, like, maybe she's okay in the first half of this Abyss because the enemies are pretty grouped together, but having to do 2 rotations, you're never going to be able to, like, 1 rotate a chamber, but maybe that's okay. Do you really need to 1 rotate chamber? No, I think she's pretty decent in the first half. Pretty awful in the second. Decent on the first. Gaming being low makes sense. Like, people probably haven't had a chance to fully invest in a DPS like this yet. I'm interested to see if Diluc and Dea went up after Shanyun's release. Like, where was Diluc before? 0.9, and now he's 1.7. Yeah, almost double the usage. Pretty cool. Pretty cool to see. Dea actually went down, so that's interesting. I guess maybe people were using her. I don't know. Why would Dea have gone down? Interesting. Klee, despite being really low, is really strong this Abyss. Good AoE for the first half, and Mono Pyro just being a good choice for the first half overall. I actually think Ito is a bit underrated here. I think, even though I don't have him, I think his AoE is kind of perfect for the first half. Traveler, Barbara, Sucrose being low. I wonder if she's higher or lower than before. Her grouping is like useless in this Abyss. She's higher than before. Like, you can still use her in the first half, but she doesn't have a strong enough suction to really do anything grouping wise, so it's just for the animal shred. And now we have options like Jean and Shenyun and obviously Kazuha, so it makes sense. And then all the 4-stars with pretty much negligible. Let's see if anything jumps out at me. I think I'm gonna plug my Lisa guide again because I think Aggravate Lisa is not a joke at all. And if you have any desire in building Lisa, check out my Lisa guide. It's really good. Dory, I'm gonna have to test out Dory. I have her built now. Hazo's super hard to use. It makes sense. Kave also super hard to use. Ning Wong, very hard to use. Although I do think she could be okay in Navia teams on the second half, but most people are just going to use something else like Zhongli. And Navia is not even that popular this Abyss. Noelle, despite getting a measurable buff with Farina, let's see, 1.5 down to 0.6. Wow. I think people, like, there was a lot of hype for Noelle being good with Farina, but I think being an on-fielder for a Farina team just gets old. I have built mine, so I need to test her to see. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for the usage rates. I personally think the key to this Abyss lies in getting a good second half. Like, having a team that can do good burst or just good single target damage is really high damage on the second half is what's the key. I enjoy Hyper Bloom a lot. I enjoy Farina a lot because she can also, you can easily set her up from off field as well. Looking at these teams, yeah, Zhao, very interesting that this is a top team. I have no idea how this is calculated. Tainari for the second half makes sense. Novelette makes sense. Ayaka Freeze makes sense. Hyper Bloom, Child International makes sense. Hu Tao, Hyper Bloom, Zhongli. Let's see. Let me give a couple other suggestions. If you have Ganyu Mono Cryo, I actually like this. You do have to build your Layla for damage, and that can make it a bit prone to dying, so be careful about that. I only like it for the first half though, not for the second. I think something really underrated if you have the units to spare is Plunge Navia. I know it sounds whack, but Plunge Navia is actually really good. It's actually Sheets at her highest DPS team. It does a ton of damage. It's really fun to play. I'll play some footage here. I used it both on the first half and the second half. I've been really enjoying that a lot. I think Raiden Hyper Bloom, Raiden National, Raiden Chevreuse, anything that doesn't need Raiden VV setup on the second half. Like Raiden Double Hydro is okay because you don't need the VV that badly, but I think all of those are really good choices. The rest of these ones we've talked about a lot. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Those are just some things that I wanted to throw out there that seemed really underrated to me. I think Linny on either side is pretty underrated because you can set up your charges while they're underground, and he has a pretty big bursty type damage. And for gameplay tips, do your best to do AoE damage. Try not to take one enemy down at a time on the first half. I like to run right behind the two constructs constructs. You can see it in all my Abyss clears where I run behind the 2 constructs on the first side, the construction specialists, and then they kind of turn around and get stuck. If you use Zhongli, you can freeze them there, or freezes them there, obviously. If you can group up the aliens, the large overgrown breacher primus, if you can group them before they make their shield, that can make them easier to hit. Otherwise, just using attacks with a lot of stagger to push them into each other can be nice. The Eremites, you can try and group them, but defeating their pets really does make them a lot easier to knock down and to group together. Using quick swap teams with shorter rotations or that don't need tons of setup is better for these multi-wave scenarios. That's why Sino feels so not that great this Abyss. And then for the suppression specialist and the assault specialist, just go to the gunning one, because if you go to the gunning one, the fighting one will come towards you, whereas if you go to the fighting one, then the gunning one will stay over and gun you down. So I don't think this Abyss is that bad. I think you can do it. My biggest recommendation, if you're having trouble, is either get better characters or build your characters better. And I have tons of great videos for that. If you want to know how to get better characters, check out my newest video, my newest Genshin video, Never Wish Again, the thumbnail. And to build better characters, check out my Build Better Characters video. I'm going to link it right there. But you can also check out my Build Better Teams video, because you want to make sure you're doing your rotations correctly. And that's a really big deal as well, especially when you're looking at Rune Serpents and Weenuts, to make sure that your rotation, you're maximizing the time you have. And the final tip I have is just to watch Abyss clears. If you have a character, just watch like what people do with that character in the Abyss. Like what I did, look up Raiden Abyss. Just make sure their investment is similar to yours. Google, search for those Abyss clears, and you'll be able to get a great idea of what people are using with your characters to clear the Abyss and how they're doing it, how it's working. And you got this. Good luck. Take care. Bye for now.